Hey Guardians, what's going on? Sorry for the extended break. I had COVID, but I'm back. Today's video is going to focus on a build that can be utilized with a OG exotic or a class item. Now, if you're looking for the class item and you really just want the one thing that you need to make this piece work, you're going to be looking in column number 1 for Spirit of the Foe Tracer. Then in column number 2, you can take your own RNG luck and use whatever you happen to get here. If you get Spirit of the Star Eater, that's pretty good with Golden Gun. If you get Spirit of Verity, that's probably the best overall neutral game that you can go with. Sotoracty's not bad. Then you've got things like Worm Husk or Coyote. They're not that great. And neither are most exotic class items, but this combination is decent. If you did happen to have good luck so far and you do have this combination, then feel free to take this for a spin because I think it's very good. So when we talk about Spirit of Foe Tracer, the original, if you are going with that, it's going to have the same thing as a class item where damaging a powerful enemy with an ability will mark that target and provide you with, for 11 seconds, a 25% weapon damage surge. So if we hit him with a stasis melee, we're going to get a stasis weapon boost for 25% weapon damage bonus for 11 seconds. Now, the only thing that the class item is not able to do is create an elemental pickup upon defeating that powerful target. Spirit of Verity states that weapon final blows with a damage type matching your grenade will grant a stacking grenade damage bonus. So as we continue to kill things with, let's say, solar weapons, we're going to be building up a stacking grenade damage bonus similar to Verity's Brow. Then when we throw that grenade, we'll lose the buff, but we'll have an empowered grenade that's going to deal some additional damage. So these are going to pair together to really make a really nice, fleshed out, all-around build that has a lot of firepower in a couple different areas.
Let's break down that subclass setup for the Foe Tracer on Prismatic.
Okay, so in this build, the super is super flexible. A lot of times in running Shadow Shot Deadfall, taking the artifact out of the equation, the one thing that gets affected by the super choice, in my opinion, and the most important thing, is Facet of Purpose, which let's just talk as our first fragment. Facet of Purpose. Picking up an Orb of Power grants either Amplified if you're on an Arc Super, Restoration when you're on the Solar Super, Frost Armor if you're on a Stasis Super, Woven Mail if you're on Silk Strike, and Overshield if you're on Tether. A lot of times I'm going to be using Tether just because a 30% debuff out on the field that lasts for as long as it does is really helpful in high-end content. Other times I'm going to be going with something that's purely offensive. Instead of the support-based super of Tether, we have Golden Gun Marksman. It also still creates a lot of orbs as well. And so we're either going to be getting Resto ×1 or we're going to getting half of our Void Overshield from just one single orb pickup. Either one is quite well and works just as good as the other. It's just a preference, really. I mean, I'm not really going to be using Silence and Squall in a lot of content, and then same thing with Silk Strike. I really don't use that in a lot of content, and I'm definitely not using Storm's Edge in Grandmaster and Dungeon content. Now let's go over like the jump, the melees, the grenades, and the aspects before we look at the rest of the last 5 fragments. As for the melee, I'm using Withering Blade. It's really great not just because of the way that it can have an effect on champions, but because we get 2 copies, and by pairing it with Gambler's Dodge, we're able to get an additional refund of one of those charges. So we'll be able to spam this out 3 separate times. Now think about that. 3 separate times that we throw that out onto a champion or a major enemy means that we're going to have a stasis weapon surge that lasts for 11 seconds each time. 3 times, that's 33 seconds of a 25% damage bonus. So that's really important that we have something like that in this build. Next, the grenade I'm going with is Swarm Grenade. This was buffed with the final shape, and then there's been some tweaks here and there, but I still believe it's going to be the best choice in the build because it has the sub-munitions that go out and they track targets, so you can kind of pre-fire it in a lot of situations as well. It's just easy fire and forget. As for the aspects that I have here, I'm using Gunpowder Gamble. This gives me 3 fragment slots, and as I kill enemies with elemental debuff damage or solar weapons, we get that improvised solar explosive, which we can then throw, and it will create an ignition, which is always good for some extra damage as well. Then the second aspect, which also provides 3 fragment slots, is Winter Shroud, and we're syncing up the stasis melee with the stasis aspect, the solar grenade with the solar aspect.
Facet of Hope is our second fragment that we're going to talk about. While you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. Light buffs would include Amplified, Cure, Radiant, Restoration, Devour, Invisibility, and Overshield. Now, because of Facet of Hope, anytime we're picking up an orb, we're going to be able to activate Facet of Hope. So it's just pretty no-brainer here to be able to take this fragment, since anytime we're picking up an orb, we're activating Facet of Hope, and we're getting that accelerated class ability energy. Third fragment in the build, Facet of Ruin, increases the size and damage of the burst when you shatter a stasis crystal or frozen target, and increases the area of effect of solar ignition. So there's a couple different ways that we can take advantage of Facet of Ruin. One of the ones that's going to be most important is going to be, because it's built and baked right in here to the subclass, is Gunpowder Gamble. This will increase the size of the area of effect of that solar ignition, because that is a solar ignition. There's going to be a couple other ways, and we'll get into that later when we talk about weapons. Fourth fragment, Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage will grant you melee energy, and rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage will grant you grenade energy. Fifth fragment, Facet of Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. While you're transcendent, that effect is increased. Sixth and final fragment is Facet of Dawn. Powered melee hits against targets make you radiant. Powered melee final blows make you and nearby allies radiant. Let's take a look at the armor mods that make up this build for Prismatic Foe Tracer. I'm just going to run through these really quickly here. 1 copy of Stasis Siphon, 1 copy of Solar Siphon, and 1 copy of Dynamo for the helmet, 1 copy of Impact Induction, 1 copy of Momentum Transfer, and then a Stasis Loader. There's a preference here. You can flex this mod, whichever you need it to be. Then Harmonic Resistance, Void Resistance, and Concussive Dampener on the chest. On the legs, 1 copy of Recuperation, 1 copy of Innervation, and 1 copy of Absolution. On the class ability, 1 copy of Reaper, 1 copy of Distribution, and 1 copy of Utility Kickstart. Do you remember Facet of Ruin? I said we would talk about that when we talk about the weapon loadouts. What Facet of Ruin does is increase the size as well as the damage of the burst when you shatter a stasis crystal or a frozen target, as well as increasing the area of effect of solar ignitions, including Gunpowder Gamble. So with that in mind, taking a look at the weapon loadouts, we're going to be using Dragon's Breath, because Dragon's Breath will create an ignition because it inflicts Scorch, which builds up and then creates that ignition. That ignition is going to be 20% larger because of Facet of Ruin, which is great for extra ad clear. While that target is building up on those Scorch stacks and getting to that point where they're going to be igniting, we're going to be taking advantage of a fusion rifle that has a chill clip in our kinetic slot, because we know that Facet of Ruin is going to buff the damage that this is going to do when we shatter the frozen target. The optional loadout that I like here in this setup is going to be using Vulpecula, Shoot to Loot Explosive Payload for Overload Champions. Then we've got 4 times the Charm, High Impact Reserves on an Ikelos Sniper Rifle. And once again, we're going to be going with Dragon's Breath here. Third and final loadout we'll talk about. The third and final loadout, I'm going to be using Conditional Finality, so it does split between being a stasis weapon and being a solar weapon, just depending on whether you're shooting the first shot, which is going to be stasis, or the second shot, which is going to be solar. Now, landing enough of those pellets when it's stasis will freeze a target. That's going to activate Facet of Ruin. Landing nearly all solar pellets will ignite the target. That's going to have a 20% larger ignition radius because of Facet of Ruin. Then I'm just going to go with a Reconstruction Explosive Light Rocket Launcher for dealing with champions in a Grandmaster Nightfall. Your preference of primary ammo weapon for what you need in your build. That's going to wrap it up for me. That's going to wrap it up for the build. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys Starside. Thank you, Guardians.